You might have seen my video on Tevi a while back when the developers allowed me to play the demo version before release. Since then, the full version is out, so let's talk about that now. Again, like with the demo version, a review copy was given to me, so thank you very much for that. Tevi is the spiritual successor of a game you may have heard of before called Rabi-Ribi, a 16-bit inspired side-scrolling action game with bullet hell boss fights. This description applies to both games. They are very similar, which you'll notice if you've played Rabi-Ribi before, or if you've just seen footage of it. Overall, Tevi is a fun side-scroller with great-looking environments and music, well-designed levels, and very fluid gameplay. The story has a dark-leaning tone, but it has humor and gags reminiscent of Rabi-Ribi. There's also a number of difficulty levels to choose from to suit your ability and/or preference. The story follows Tevi, a genius engineer, who tries to collect mysterious artifacts known as astral gears to help out with her bunny-obsessed father's research. Along with a colorful pair of companions, she ventures out into a combination steampunk and magic-filled world. The world is populated by humans, beastkin, who are people with animal ears, and mechanical magic hybrid beings called Magitech. There is friction between the various races, which is apparent right away from the various comments you get from the people populating the world. You first see Tevi imprisoned and scared, but it's revealed that this was just a bit of acting, and she's perfectly capable of escaping. Her confident and assertive personality is established pretty much right away. I like that you get to some gameplay almost immediately. You're only interrupted when the game wants to introduce some gameplay mechanics to you, but to be honest, that's pretty unobtrusive. Along for the journey are Celia, an angel, and Sable, a demon. Celia is serious and thinks quite highly of herself, while Sable is meek and more than a bit naive. So yeah, they went with ironic personalities there. Both have their own reasons for tagging along with Tevi and finding the astral gears. They also each inhabit one of each of the two orbiters that Tevi has with her. Orbiters are devices that shoot projectiles. You can switch between them as they offer different attacks depending on which one is selected. I think the mix of characters makes the story interesting enough, and I also find the banter between the trio amusing. Interactions with other characters can range anywhere from funny and strange to serious and sad. The overall tone of the setting and story is melancholic. That is contrasted with Tevi's go-with-the-flow attitude, which often serves as a bit of comedic relief, or at least as a way to keep things from getting too serious. But she does show moments of thoughtfulness and uncertainty from time to time, indicating that she does have a bit more hidden depth than she lets on. I guess you could say she has a little bit of a front, but that seems pretty normal. By this point, you probably get the gist of what the gameplay is like from the footage, but I'll give you a bit of a rundown on how the game flows. It is story-driven, so you'll get a quest marker telling you where to go. I say quest marker, but there can be multiple markers at once. On your way to those markers, you'll explore new areas filled with various enemies. Your opponents will have different attack patterns depending what they are. You can use melee attacks as well as ranged attacks using your orbiters to take them down. Traversing the levels isn't particularly difficult from a platforming perspective. You can't die from falling, and there aren't that many level hazards to watch out for, though they do exist. An early one you come across are those glowing orb things that can explode. Most of the danger comes from enemies. You'll notice inaccessible areas. This could be because of story reasons or lack of abilities, like for example being able to double jump or sliding down those one block high openings. Sometimes you'll have to blow up stuff that's in your way. There are instances where that's not always apparent, where you have to place a bomb. So that's why you'll see me sometimes place bombs on the edge or at the edges of rooms, just to check if there's like a secret or something like that. Or sometimes there's actually openings that don't reveal themselves until you run into the walls. So yeah, that's a thing you might want to do too. Eventually, all of that will lead into a boss fight of some sort that has various stages to it. After that, you'll probably end up back in some sort of town or safe area where you can prepare yourself a bit before heading out to the next area. That's like a simplistic view of how it all works, but there's a nice feeling of progression as you always get more abilities and become stronger in some way. For example, you'll learn combos. You can upgrade your gear, like orbiters, to be more powerful. Enemies usually drop the materials that you need for that. You'll stumble upon new equipment that allows you to get to places you previously couldn't, like those boots that allow you to double jump, for example. When you level up, you get the ability to equip more sigils. Sigils are things you can collect that give you specific abilities or buffs. There is a cost to them, and being a higher level allows you to equip more and more powerful ones. But if you're somebody looking for more of a challenge, you can choose to not equip some or any sigils. You can also craft consumables, which you want to have ready for boss fights in particular. Towns often also have stores where you can buy useful things and power-ups for Tevi. Teleportation and save spots are distributed throughout the world, usually one teleportation portal per area, and the save points are at every safe zone as well as just before a boss fight. Saving also brings up your health to full, which is nice. There are various difficulty levels, though the hardest ones aren't available at the start. Like Rabi-Ribi, I put Tevi on normal and it seems to be just fine for me, but I think normal mode is easier in Tevi than it was in Rabi-Ribi. With Tevi, I seem to always follow a certain pattern with boss fights, for example. I save just before a boss fight, as you do. Then I die just before beating the boss because I realized, oh, I forgot to craft some health items. Then I craft them before retrying the fight, but then I win not needing those items because I already know what to expect from this boss. With Rabi-Ribi, I remember having to retry far more frequently. It feels like there's 1 or 1.5 notch difference between what both games consider normal. You can change the difficulty mid-game, so if you're finding it too difficult or not enough of a challenge, you aren't stuck with the difficulty level you chose at the start of the game. In terms of controls, I'm using a keyboard, though you can use a controller if you want. I grew up with keyboard controls on PC and joysticks on an Amstrad CPC 6128, so I didn't really use controllers until later in life. For certain types of games, I still can't get used to them, so hence why I'm using a keyboard here. I changed a few key bindings to my liking and it was good to go. Everything is changeable and most of the time the game also reminds you what keys are bound to what, like when you're going through the menus and stuff. Let's talk about graphics now. Tevi is a 16-bit inspired side-scroller. I think you've noticed that by now. Inspired is the key word here. There's of course quite a bit of stuff going on that you wouldn't really see on an actual 16-bit console game. I really like the overall look. The color choices are nice and there's a good use of gradients. If you compare the environments from Rabi-Ribi to Tevi, you can really see the difference. The background and foreground details in the levels look much more detailed and three-dimensional. There's a real mood change when traversing from one area to another. The game does have a steampunk aesthetic as its basis. You can see that in Anathema, or however you pronounce it, Anathema. But yeah, that place is well Victorian looking. The desolate desert town fits this as well, and there's also this very industrial area, because, Industrial Revolution and all that. Not to mention the clothes that some characters wear, and the design of some of the enemies. But there's plenty of other areas that look completely different, which I think is great. There's one that looks a bit like a fairy tale foresty sort of thing, and the characters wear clothing that looks very much, looks like traditional kind of clothing you'd see in the alpine regions of Europe. And also, I just want to mention a pet peeve of mine. This is something that bothers me pretty much, well, it's bothered me pretty much all my life, this particular thing. And it doesn't really matter in terms of gameplay. And that's the incorrect depiction of valve gear on Steam engines. I mean, look at that nonsense. It's just random. Like, how could the wheels even turn? But you don't ever see an animation, so the developers probably didn't realize that that's just BS and it doesn't work. Anyways, like I said before, there are a few things going on with the graphics that wouldn't work on a pure 16-bit game. In terms of effects, the game is very colorful and distinctive, though it's not a visual overload. So you can still clearly see all the projectiles that are being shot at you, for example, and, it doesn't all merge into some sort of visual mush. I think the way the projectiles glow is just right, and it makes them stand out from the background very well. Boss fights look pretty cool because of this. The characters exist in 3 different styles, or like art styles, I guess. The first being 16-bit chibi style during gameplay. The animations are good and the designs are pretty cute, very much like Rabi-Ribi. The second is more realistic as seen during the cutscenes. It's like a visual novel type look where the characters have various facial expressions and poses. The third type of style are full screen illustrations. They happen occasionally in the story here and there, and they feature more complex shading and quite a bit more detail. Overall, it's a good-looking game, and the increase in production value since Rabi-Ribi is very much appreciated. Now on to sound and music. The sound effects work quite well. Everything's very distinct and nothing seems out of place. A good way to describe them, I guess, is functional. There's different sounds for different combos and attacks. when shooting charged shots, when attacks hit an enemy's shield, or when you break a boss's guard or whatever the game calls it. You know, those are just some examples there. The voice acting is Japanese and it's excellent. I actually recognize basically almost all of the voices, and it turns out after a quick search that they hired famous voice actors. So if you've watched anime and played Japanese games from around, let's say 2010 to now, you know, that time period, then you'll have heard them for sure. The music is great. There's actually a streamer mode, which is on by default, which replaces a couple of licensed tracks with original pieces that have a very similar vibe. That's so there isn't a copyright problem when streaming or publishing videos. If you look up the songs on YouTube, you can find some examples there. I actually find it weird that they did that, because, you know, why not just use the streamer mode songs? The songs are excellent, and yeah, I'm not really sure why they couldn't just use their own. I mean, they had to make them to begin with, so anyway, whatever the reason, it's a thing. There's a nice range of music, happy and calm, fast and exciting, or slow and sad. I'm always drawn to the more dark and melancholic music, so one of my personal favorites is the song that plays in Anathema. I just want to bring up a few things now here. The first being post-game content. I haven't finished the game, but once you do, there is free roam available, which has no story, and it doesn't have any plot barriers. Additionally, there's also higher difficulty levels, though I'm not sure what exact criteria is needed to unlock that. Specifically, I'm not sure if you have to finish the story at a certain difficulty or if you just need to finish the story, period. From what I've been told, Tevi isn't as difficult as Rabi-Ribi was, and I did notice that as well, at least at normal difficulty. I've seen some discussion online about that as well. I also remember seeing some specific comments mentioning that the two highest difficulty levels aren't that different from each other. But that's all way beyond my skill level though, so if anybody knows a bit more about that, I'd love if anyone could clarify in the comments. Another thing that isn't really detrimental to gameplay, but is a little bit of a letdown for many who are fans of Rabi-Ribi, is the reduction in fan service. Rabi-Ribi did fan service in a particular way that made the game amusing in a way that worked well with the story. One of my favorites being one character just not having any pants at all, and there's nobody mentions it ever in the game, at least that I noticed. You know, stuff like that I find amusing. Tevi tries to be darker with its story, but it has flashes of Rabi-Ribi's style of humor, but I don't think it's as memorable as Rabi-Ribi in that regard. Rabi-Ribi is just a bit more original. Though, like I said, Tevi does have flashes of those moments, and it's appreciated when they're there. But yeah, overall, I really like Tevi. It's an excellent game with excellent visuals and music. I found the story engaging enough, and I like the humor. I always feel like I'm progressing somehow. The overall look and setting also feels a bit more original than just your regular generic fantasy thing, so that's good. I think it's very much worth taking a look at if you like these sort of games, or if you liked Rabi-Ribi. I hope you found the review interesting and helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.